Welcome to another video on Africa as a superpower, the United States of Africa. For more informative video like this, subscribe, share, and like our channel. Life Fact Daily. What if I told you that the world could wake up tomorrow and discover a brand new superpower, one that nobody saw coming? Imagine the entire African continent, with its billion-plus people, vast natural resources, and strategic position, united under one flag, one government, one economy, and one powerful military. Overnight, the balance of global power would change forever. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're exploring one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios in modern history. What would happen if Africa united into a single country? Stay tuned, because the results might surprise you. Currently, Africa is divided into 54 independent nations. Together, these countries are home to nearly 1.5 billion people. That's already about 16% of the world's entire population. But here's the kicker. Africa also possesses more natural resources than almost any other continent on Earth. Oil, gold, platinum, uranium, rare metals. You name it, Africa has it. Now, imagine if all of that wealth, all of that human potential, and all of that landmass was brought together under a single government, a United States of Africa. On paper, this hypothetical superstate would instantly rewrite the global power balance, especially when it comes to economics. As of 2025, Africa's combined nominal GDP is estimated at between 2.39 and 2.83 trillion US dollars. Now, compared to the economic giants, that may not sound like much. The United States sits at around 29 trillion, and China at roughly 18 trillion. But here's what makes things interesting. A united Africa would instantly leapfrog into the global top 10, overtaking countries like Italy and Brazil. It would even be breathing down the necks of European powers like France and the UK, which sit just above the 3 trillion mark. That means Africa would rank higher than Canada, South Korea, and even Russia in terms of total GDP. If you're thinking that's impressive, you're right. But here's the real kicker. Africa's potential for growth is enormous. With proper leadership, unified policies, and efficient use of resources, this new Africa could climb even higher. We'd be looking at the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world right from the start, with nowhere to go but up. And it doesn't stop there. A single African nation would control massive energy reserves, essential natural resources, and some of the most important trade routes on the planet. Ports along the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean already facilitate a huge share of global shipping. In a unified scenario, Africa could set the terms of global trade in ways we've never seen before. Sounds like the birth of a new global superpower, right? But before we crown Africa as the world's next dominant force, let's pause. Because running a country of this size, let alone building it from scratch, would be a colossal challenge. Think about it. How do you govern more than 1 billion people spread across deserts, jungles, megacities, and savannas, all speaking hundreds of languages and following different faiths? The landmass alone would be mind-boggling. Africa is the second largest continent on Earth, covering more than 11 million square miles. That's about 20% of all the land on the planet. In fact, a unified Africa would be about 3 times the size of Europe and rival the continent of Asia itself. That's not just big, it's monumental. But let's look at the people. Africa's population isn't just massive, it's also rapidly growing. While India and China each have populations above 1.4 billion, Africa isn't far behind. And here's the shocking prediction. By the end of the 21st century, Africa's population is expected to hit 2.4 billion people. That would make it the most populous nation in the world, representing nearly 40% of humanity. And there's something else to consider. Africa has the youngest population on Earth. The median age across the continent is just 19 years old. Compare that to the global average of about 30, and you start to see the picture. This new country would be bursting with youth, energetic, ambitious, and ready to drive change. But that also means the government would face enormous pressure to invest heavily in education, healthcare, and job creation to keep pace with such a young and growing population. So while the idea of a united Africa sounds powerful, it wouldn't just be another country. It would be the most diverse, dynamic, and potentially chaotic nation in human history. But with great challenges that brings us to the real question. What would it actually take to unify Africa? And what kind of struggles and triumphs would this new country face? Let's break it down. Challenges also come great opportunities. Stick with us. We'll dive deep into the challenges. Language barriers, religion, politics, education, and even currency. This is where things get complicated, but also where the future of a united Africa could be decided. We looked at the raw potential of a united African continent. Its massive population, natural resources, and economic promise. But let's be real for a moment. Creating a United States of Africa wouldn't just be about waving a flag and declaring independence from division. It would be one of the most ambitious, complex, and challenging political projects in human history. So, what exactly are the challenges this mega nation would face? 1. Language diversity. Let's start with one of the most obvious. Language. Africa is home to an estimated 2,000 languages. That's right, 2,000. Imagine running a government where every law, every political debate, every piece of public communication has to be translated into potentially hundreds of tongues. Compare this with countries like the US, where English is dominant, or China, where Mandarin holds everything together. Even India, with its many official languages, still struggles with communication issues. Now multiply that problem by 10, and you start to see the scale of Africa's challenge. Would the new government choose one dominant official language, like English, French, or Swahili? Or would it attempt to recognize dozens of regional languages at once? Both strategies have pros and cons. A single official language could unify communication, but alienate people who feel their culture is being erased. Recognizing too many languages, on the other hand, could bog the system down in endless bureaucracy. Language isn't just about words, it's about identity. And identity is a deeply emotional issue. If Africa is to unite, it must carefully balance unity and diversity without letting one group dominate the other. 2. Religious and cultural differences. Now, let's talk about religion. Africa is home to 3 of the world's major faiths: Christianity, Islam, and indigenous African religions. In the north, Islam is dominant, while Christianity has deep roots across the sub-Saharan regions. Add in traditional belief systems, and you have a continent that is as spiritually diverse as it is geographically vast. Religion can be a unifying force, but can also be a source of conflict. History has shown us that religious differences have sparked tensions, civil wars, and even genocides across the globe. A united Africa would have to find a way to respect all religions equally, while keeping radicalism and intolerance in check. A secular state could work, but only if leaders can gain the trust of every community. Otherwise, cracks in the union could form before the country even gets off the ground. 3. Political integration. If you thought religion and language were tricky, wait until you consider politics. Right now, Africa's 54 nations operate under very different systems of government. Some are democracies, others are authoritarian regimes. Some have monarchies, while others function under military rule. Corruption remains a problem in many countries, with power often concentrated in the hands of a few elites. So, how do you merge dozens of political systems into one functioning government? Do you build a federal system like the United States of America, where each country becomes a state under one national government? Or do you centralize everything in a single capital, with one parliament and one president running the show? Both options are messy. A federal system might allow regions to maintain some autonomy, but it risks constant conflict between states and central authorities. A centralized system, on the other hand, could alienate smaller regions that feel overlooked by the national government. And let's not forget, deciding where to place the capital city would be one of the most politically explosive debates in history. Would it be Cairo, Addis Ababa, Lagos, Johannesburg, or maybe a brand new city built just for the Union, like Abuja in Nigeria or Brasilia in Brazil. 4. Education and literacy. Another major challenge lies in education. Right now, Africa has some of the lowest literacy rates in the world. In South Sudan, for example, only about 27% of people can read and write. Meanwhile, in Libya, literacy is above 91%. That's a massive gap. On average, the literacy rate across Africa is around 64%, with huge differences between regions. Education is the foundation of national progress. Without a strong education system, a united Africa would struggle to compete globally. That means the new government would need to invest heavily in schools, teacher training, and digital learning platforms to bring the entire population up to speed. And we're not just talking about reading and writing. Africa would need to train doctors, engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs to harness its full potential. The challenge? Money. Education requires funding. And while Africa is rich in resources, it has long struggled with corruption and resource mismanagement. A transparent, efficient system of investment would be critical to turning Africa's young population into a powerhouse workforce. 5. Healthcare and disease control. Next up, healthcare. Africa faces some of the toughest health challenges in the world. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, about 11% of the population lives with HIV/AIDS. Malaria continues to be a major killer, especially among children. Access to hospitals, clean water, and reliable healthcare workers varies dramatically between regions. A united Africa would need a centralized health system capable of responding to outbreaks quickly, distributing medicine efficiently, and ensuring rural areas aren't left behind. Think about it. Diseases don't respect borders. If the entire continent is one country, then an outbreak in one corner could quickly spread everywhere. The government would need strong institutions, advanced technology, and international cooperation to protect its people. But there's also a huge opportunity here. With proper investment, Africa could become a global leader in medical research, especially for tropical diseases that are often ignored by Western pharmaceutical companies. Imagine an Africa where homegrown scientists and doctors not only treat their own people, but also contribute to solving global health crises. 6. Currency and economy. Now let's talk money. Currently, Africa is divided into multiple currencies, over 40 in total. Some countries use the CFA franc, others the Egyptian pound, the South African rand, or the Nigerian naira. Uniting under one single currency would be an economic revolution, but also a logistical nightmare. Would Africa adopt a brand new currency, like the afro? Or would it peg its money to the dollar, the euro, or even gold? A single currency could boost trade, stabilize economies, and make Africa a financial powerhouse. But it could also create instability if weaker economies drag down stronger ones. Just look at the Eurozone crisis in Europe for an example. To succeed, Africa would need a strong central bank, strict fiscal policies, and a commitment to fighting corruption. Otherwise, the dream of a united currency could collapse before it even begins. 7. Infrastructure and development. And finally, let's look at infrastructure. Africa is massive, but its roads, railways, and airports are still underdeveloped compared to other continents. In some regions, traveling from one country to another can take days, even when the distance isn't that far. Without modern transportation, unifying the continent would be nearly impossible. A united Africa would need to invest in high-speed rail networks, modern highways, and advanced digital infrastructure. Imagine being able to travel from Cairo to Cape Town in a matter of hours, or shipping goods from Lagos to Nairobi with ease. That level of connectivity would transform Africa's economy and bring its people closer together. But here's the truth. It would cost trillions of dollars. Building infrastructure on this scale would require massive investment, international partnerships, and, above all, political stability. The balancing act. So, here's the reality. A United States of Africa would face enormous challenges right from the start, from language barriers to political systems, From healthcare crises to infrastructure gaps, the list of obstacles is long. But if these challenges could be managed with strong leadership, transparency, and long-term vision, then the opportunities would far outweigh the risks. Africa has always been seen by outsiders as a land of resources to exploit. But as one united country, Africa could finally flip the script, taking control of its destiny and standing as an equal player on the world stage. So far, we've seen the raw potential of a united Africa, and we've broken down the massive challenges it would face. But let's fast forward. Imagine for a moment that Africa succeeds. Imagine the languages, the religions, the politics, the corruption, the infrastructure problems. All of it has been managed or minimized. What would the world look like if Africa actually became one unified superpower? Let's dive in. 1. Africa's natural resources, a global bargaining chip. First things first, resources. Africa is a gold mine, literally and figuratively. It holds 30% of the world's mineral resources, 40% of its gold, 90% of its chromium and platinum, and massive reserves of oil and natural gas. On top of that, Africa possesses 65% of the world's arable land that can grow food. In a century where climate change is making farming harder in many countries, that agricultural potential alone could make Africa the world's breadbasket. Now, think about the geopolitical power that comes with this. Today, countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia hold leverage because they control vital oil and gas supplies. A united Africa wouldn't just control oil and gas. It would dominate multiple sectors: gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, rare earth metals, and agriculture. These are the resources that power everything from smartphones and electric cars to solar panels and artificial intelligence. If Africa managed these resources wisely, it could stop being exploited by foreign corporations and instead dictate the terms of trade. No longer would Western or Asian powers set the prices. Africa would be in control. 2. The trade power of a united Africa. But resources alone don't make a superpower. Trade does. Right now, many African countries trade more with Europe, China, or the United States than they do with each other. That's because colonial borders and poor infrastructure have historically limited intra-African trade. But in united Africa, there would be no internal trade barriers. Goods could flow freely from Lagos to Nairobi, from Cairo to Johannesburg, from Dakar to Addis Ababa. This is exactly what the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, is already trying to achieve. If the entire continent were one country, that dream would be fully realized. Africa's combined internal market would be one of the largest in the world, rivaling even the European Union. And let's not forget the ports. Africa's strategic location is unmatched. With access to the Mediterranean Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Atlantic, a united Africa would control some of the most important shipping lanes on Earth. Global trade routes would now pass through African-controlled waters, giving the continent enormous influence over international commerce. 3. Solving poverty and inequality. But here's the part that matters most to everyday people: poverty. Today, Africa is often portrayed as a continent of poverty, famine, and struggle. And yes, many African nations face deep challenges. But a united Africa could turn the tide. With pooled resources, a single government could launch continent-wide development programs, building schools, hospitals, clean water systems, and transportation networks in places that have been neglected for decades. Redistribution of wealth would also be possible. Richer regions like South Africa, Nigeria, or Egypt could contribute more to the national budget, helping lift poorer regions like Chad or Malawi. Of course, this would require fairness, transparency, and a commitment to equality. But if done right, it could dramatically reduce poverty rates across the entire continent. Think about it. Instead of competing with each other for foreign aid or investment, African nations would work together as one. That means stronger bargaining power, better deals, and more control over how wealth is distributed. 4. The military power of Africa. Now, let's talk about military power. Currently, African nations have fragmented, underfunded armies. But combined, their manpower is enormous. A united Africa would have access to more than 2 million active soldiers, millions more in reserves, and vast resources to build advanced technology. With the right investment, Africa could establish one of the largest and most capable militaries on Earth. Strategically, the continent holds critical military value. From North Africa's proximity to Europe, to the control of the Suez Canal, to the vast Atlantic and Indian Ocean coastlines, Africa's position would give it unmatched influence. Any global power wanting access to vital sea lanes would have to consider Africa's role. But here's the interesting twist. Africa wouldn't necessarily need to flex its muscles through war. Its real power would lie in diplomacy and economics. By controlling resources, trade, and shipping routes, Africa could enforce its interests without firing a shot. 5. Technology and innovation. People often underestimate Africa when it comes to technology. But did you know that Africa is one of the fastest growing regions for mobile technology? Apps like M-Pesa revolutionized mobile banking years before similar systems became common in the West. With a young, tech-savvy population, Africa is uniquely positioned to leapfrog traditional industries and go straight into the digital age. Imagine a united Africa investing heavily in renewable energy, artificial intelligence, and space exploration. With its natural resources and youthful workforce, it could become a global hub for innovation. The question is whether the leadership could harness this potential instead of letting it slip away. 6. A new voice on the global stage. Now, here's where things get really interesting: geopolitics. If Africa were one country, it would automatically secure a permanent seat at the global decision-making table. No longer would it be a collection of weaker voices at the United Nations or the World Bank. Instead, it would be one of the largest, most influential nations on Earth. Africa would also become a key player in global alliances. Would it side with the United States and Europe? Or would it lean toward China and Russia? Or perhaps, for the first time, Africa would chart its own independent course, free from outside influence. This shift would dramatically alter global politics. Suddenly, the West couldn't dictate terms to African countries individually. China couldn't strike resource deals with one small nation at a time. Instead, they'd all have to negotiate with a unified superpower. And that changes everything. 7. The cultural revolution. And let's not forget culture. Africa is the birthplace of humanity, home to thousands of ethnic groups, languages, traditions, music, art, and storytelling. A united Africa wouldn't just be a political or economic powerhouse. It would be a cultural giant. African music already dominates global charts. Afrobeat, Amapiano, and other genres are influencing artists worldwide. Imagine the global impact of a unified cultural identity, with Africa promoting its movies, literature, fashion, and heritage on the world stage. Just as American culture dominates through Hollywood and music, Africa could create its own cultural empire. The future of a united Africa. So, what would the world look like if Africa became one country? The challenges would be enormous. Languages, religions, politics, corruption, infrastructure. But if Africa overcame them, the rewards would be just as massive. It would instantly become one of the largest economies in the world, control the majority of the planet's most valuable resources, hold unmatched strategic positions, and represent nearly 40% of the global population. A United States of Africa wouldn't just be another country. It would be a new superpower, reshaping the global order and giving billions of people a voice they've never truly had before. The question is, will Africa remain divided, or will it one day unite and take its rightful place on the world stage? Only time will tell. If you enjoyed this series, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into global what-if scenarios. And let us know in the comments, do you think Africa will ever unite?